let's start with well of ideas. This one right here. So I will put this in the chat, everybody. Okay. I'm going to just move right to this page here. All right. Very, very quickly, if you're new to CodeWars, we basically have 3 sections on this page, or 3 main sections: the description of the problem, the area to write our code, and the area to write our tests. Now, if you're like me, probably many of you are, when I was learning and practicing, I never, except for maybe to look for clues, I never worked with tests. I never looked at the tests. I just thought, like, I don't know why someone would do this. You just have to solve the problem. However, I have come to appreciate that test-driven development is oftentimes the best, though not always. And we will pretty much follow test-driven development as we go today. And if you watch any of my videos from this problem or other problems, I got too many tabs open now. You will see that each video is pretty much following test-driven development and teaching test-driven development. So, I think it's just like the best. I have only good things to say about test-driven development, but it is not the only way. And but it's just the best. If you can really get good with test-driven development, you will almost always do better in your interviews. Okay, great. So let's get started. I will read. For every good kata idea, there seem to be quite a few bad ones. In this kata, you need to check the provided 2-dimensional array for good ideas. And they're saying that array is called X. Good ideas, good, and bad ideas, bad. If there are 1 or 2 good ideas, return publish. If there are more than 2, return I smell a series. If there are no good ideas, as is often the case, return fail. The subarrays may not be the same length. The solution should always be case insensitive. So for example, lowercase good, uppercase good, and mixed case good all count as a good idea. All inputs may not be strings. Excuse me. Great. Okay. So if I'm in an interview, and the approach I might give for an interview with a person as opposed to not might be slightly different, but the first thing I'm going to do is read the problem aloud. I have seen many people struggle to read aloud and comprehend the problem at the same time. You will not always have to read a problem aloud in an interview, but many times you will. If you have problems with that, I would recommend you practice it. So if you can do it with yourself, just reading aloud. If not, find a friend and say, hey, I want to read aloud to you, and then I want to relate back to you what I've just read. And that brings us to the next step, which is reiterate in your own words the problem. I should say reiterate the problem in your own words. So for me, I'm going to say, okay, so based on what I read, I understand I'm going to be given an array. That array is going to have multiple arrays inside of it, or 0 or more arrays inside of it. Those arrays are going to have good or bad elements inside of them, which may or may not be a string. And what I need to do is I need to go through every element in every subarray, counting how many times good shows up. Depending on how many times good shows up, I want to return one of 3 strings, which are publish, I smell a series, or fail. Then check in with the interviewer. Is that right? Did I understand the problem correctly? And all of that just comes with practice, right? You gotta slow yourself down, gotta comprehend it, give it back to the interviewer. Did I understand it? And then check in. Did I understand that correctly? Yeah, Jordan, it sounds like you did understand that correctly. Okay. Next step is ask clarifying questions. And I call these steps, but to some degree they intermingle, right? If after reading the problem, immediately a question occurs to you, you might want to ask that question right away before reiterating the problem in your own words. Or you might want to do a partial reiteration, and then you say, now I didn't understand this part. Can you help me understand better? What does this mean? Or what does that mean? Or whatever. What is, for example, I have a question. What is X here? I didn't understand that. Oh, Jordan, X is the variable name that we're giving that 2-dimensional array. Oh, okay, fine, something like that. Okay. Then we give examples. This is maybe the most important. That's definitely one I see people struggle with. So we just want to hone in on this. And give examples is tightly related to some form of test-driven development. So after I've reiterated the problem and checked in with the interviewer, and the interviewer says, yep, sounds like you understood it correctly. Okay, let me put down some examples here. So now I'm thinking the simplest case is I'm given an array, that array X, and it doesn't have any other arrays inside of it. It's possible, right, that I could get an empty array? Yeah, Jordan, that's definitely possible. Okay, so if that was the case, then I'm just going to get back a string, and that string would be, if there are one or two, okay, it's not that. If there are more than two, nope, it's not that. So there are no good ideas. Okay, so that would return this string fail. I'm just going to put that down here. Does that look right to you? Again, always checking in with the interviewer, like obsessively. Did I understand that correctly? Yeah, there's no goods. So you definitely don't have one or two goods, so it returns fail. Okay, cool. All right, so then of course I could have an array with an array inside, and it could have something like one good. And I'm just going to do that one all lowercase. So now that good, this would return publish, because I've got one good there, like so. Yep, okay, good. All right, moving on to the next one. Okay, if I had an example where I had still just one array and it had good, bad, that would be the same thing, because I have one good, one bad, publish. Yep, okay, great. Then I'm going to move on to, what if I had more than two goods? So if I added another good here and then another good, that would be, what's that string here? I smell a series. And where I can, this is me saying this to you guys, I copy and paste. So if I can just copy and paste that, I'm going to do that instead of try and type it out. Especially, I'm not a very good typer, so especially if you're a bad typer. If you're a really good typer, you think of it. Now, you'll almost always notice as we build up examples, if we build them correctly and in the right order, we have a pyramid-looking shape to them, meaning we started with the simplest valid input. A string is not a valid input here. A number is not a valid input here. An object is not a valid input here. Only an array is a valid input. We could have asked, and I think this is overkill. You could ask, hey, will I ever get anything besides for an array? No, they're usually going to say like, no, you won't. So I typically wouldn't ask that. I don't think it's a bad question to ask though. Okay, assuming that I can only get an array, the simplest array I can get is an empty array. We call this our base case. What is the simplest valid input? Great. From there, we build up in increasingly complex ways. So we could have done something like this. Okay, what if I have an array inside of an array with nothing? Again, we have to respect the interviewer's time. We have to respect how much time we have in the interview. So we may not hit every single little mark, but okay, well, I might have an array in that array. And in that case, I have good, and that would give me to publish. Okay, what if I have good and bad? Still publish. Okay, what if I still only have one internal array, but I have good, bad, good, good? I smell a series. Perfect. All right, and now I'm going to go to one or two more examples. And of course, the next thing would be, what if I have another array inside of here? And I'm going to cut this one down to say good and bad. And I'm going to add here good and bad, something like that. Again, this will not be I smell a series. This will be publish, since we've got two goods and only no more than two goods. Okay, we've got a couple more examples we want to write out here. We would want to say, okay, what if I have something like a third array and it has good? This would be I smell a series. Cool. And I'll do one more, and that one will be, what if I have multiple arrays inside, but just a lot of bad, 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 bad. And then this would be fail here. Cool. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 examples. Now, most problems are going to require between 6 and 8 examples to adequately explore the problem. That's something I've just found doing lots of problems like this with lots of different people in lots of different places. And for the most part, this doesn't exactly look like a pyramid, right? I'd say it's not perfect, but you can see how we basically start really simple and then we go to more complex as we go. I think that's deceptively simple, and I'd be happy to take any questions about this so far. No questions?
This is amazing. The way that you break this down. I mean, I paid for Algo Expert, I paid for Leak Code, and the way that you're explaining this, like you're talking to us like we're 5 years old. I like this.
Good, great. Happy to hear that. That's wonderful. I do. I'm very much in the vein of a 5-year-old should be able to read your code and basically understand what's going on. So I don't always succeed at that, but I certainly try. Okay, cool. Once we've got now, there's always a rule that, hey, the interviewer is the boss. So I think this is the best framework to go with an interview, but almost always sometime during the interview, the interviewer is going to say, hey, go ahead and read this problem to yourself. Or, okay, I see your examples, but we need to move on. Okay, great. Well, I'm going to move on then. I'm not going to fight with the interviewer. No, I have to do my examples. I'm going to say, okay, they're the boss. If they say, hey, 3 examples is enough, let's move on. Okay. I might say, you know what? I really like to build up a nice test suite of examples. I feel like that helps me. But I totally appreciate we don't have a lot of time for that. So I agree with you. Let's move on or whatever. I don't fight with the interviewer. I try and make it work for them, but I practice to what I think is a really good standard. And then I adjust based on the interviewer. Okay. Once we give our examples, we write our function signature. Now here, this is already done for us. By function signature, I mean exactly what we see here. If it was an interview, this is a terrible name for a function. And I would not be happy with somebody who did this. Something like check for 1 or 2 good ideas. There's a good function name for us. Here's exactly what we're trying to do. Again, a 5-year-old could pretty much understand what we're doing here, right? Now, we can't change this in CodeWars. It won't work if we change the function name. So we'll go back to well, but that's what I'd be looking for in an interview. And the next thing is X. We can change X here. We can change our parameter names in CodeWars. So we definitely don't X. What does X mean? Doesn't mean anything. So let's do something like array of ideas. Something like that at least is a bit more descriptive. Okay.
Sorry, Jordan. So
yes,
you can change the name of the function, but you can change the parameter inside the function.
If you're on a platform like LeetCode or CodeWars, when they go to test your code, they need this function to match what they have on the back end, which means we cannot change it here. Okay. If you're in an interview, you often can change it. If you're using something like Replit or CoderPad or something like that, where you're just kind of coding freeform, they will be looking for you to have a nice descriptive function name. Here on CodeWars, what we can do is we can change the parameter names because it's internal to the function. So whatever we put here, as long as we're consistent, it will work.
Okay, I see. Thank you.
Okay. Next, we write our pseudocode. Now, I personally don't like pseudocode that much. I would only do it in an interview, and even then I might skip it, but I see so much feedback from interviewers and they are real big on this. So I've made it a part of my process, because if so many people are asking for it and looking for it, then we gotta work with it. Okay,
hey, Jordan.
Yeah.
I had an interview about a week ago, and the guy that was interviewing me said, I don't care if you don't know the syntax, you can Google syntax. I just want to see your pseudocode, your thought process, your.
Fair enough. I agree with the idea there. Whatever. I can't deny that, again, I've read lots and lots of feedback from students of mine, and interviewers are very keen on pseudocode. So let's go. All right, around pseudocode, here's how I would do it. I do it inside the function, right? Because our pseudocode is basically going to go line for line with our actual code, I prefer to do it inside the function. That's another place. If the interviewer says, well, don't write the function, you got to write pseudocode first or something, I say, I'm just going to write the function signature and then write my pseudocode. No, I need you to just write pseudocode. Okay, I'm just going to write pseudocode. Obviously, they're the boss, so I'm going to play by their rules. Pseudocode is extremely important in an interview, yes. But as long as they allow me to do it my way, and most will, as long as this is a reasonable process, we're not doing anything crazy here. Most interviewers are just going to be like wide-eyed, like, wow, this is great. This is wonderful. Okay, so here we're thinking to ourselves, how are we going to do this? All right, I'm going to iterate through the top level array. I'm going to look for subarrays. I'm going to iterate through the subarrays. I'm going to look for strings that are good or bad, but really I don't even care about the bad ones. I only care about the good ones. In order to examine it, I need to normalize it, meaning I need to say do all lowercase, something like that. And then I need to get a count of those good strings. And in the end, I need to check what my count is and return one of these strings based on the count. The only other condition I see is if my count goes above 2, then I can break out of my loop and just return I smell a series, right? So in this case here, if I'm counting along, I say, okay, here's one good, here's a bad, here's a good. So that's 2 goods. Okay, keep going. Here's a bad, fine. Here's 3 goods. Well, we happen to be done in this case, but even if we weren't done, even if we were to add something else here, like another bad, we can just break out of our loop here because it doesn't matter if I find more goods, it's still going to be I smell a series. So then sometimes you have to talk through that, right? And just talk out loud with the interviewer. Here's how I'm going to do it. If you are not good at this yet, you got to find a friend and you guys got to start practicing together. Or about your thought process versus how do you memorize syntax well. Sure. And I think I mean, we haven't written any code yet, right? So till now we're very much in the thought process realm, not in the code realm. In fact, you'll see that we don't even get to code until the last 2 steps. And we got 2 more steps to go in this process, and the only code we've written is this so far. All right. So thanks, Chris. I appreciate that. Send me the offer. I'll consider it. Chris says I'm hired in the chat. So, all right. So here we say we're going to initialize count of good at 0. Right? We want to start that count at 0. Here we'll say we want to iterate through array of ideas. And notice, of course, even in my pseudocode, I keep these things congruent. That's why I like to do this first, so that when I'm using my parameters, I can just refer to the exact names that I've set. All right, and then here, a couple things here, right? Where I say iterate through array of ideas, I don't say use a for loop. I don't say use a while loop. I don't say use a for of loop. I don't say I'm agnostic, right? I don't get into syntax. I don't say even what language you have to use. So just go with what are we doing? We're iterating through an array of ideas. We leave it up to the developer, a future us, to figure out how we're going to do that. Okay, here we say iterate through each subarray. Now, again, with my pseudocode, I indent. Again, I don't think this is like the way, not the Mandalorian here, but this is a really good way. If you think you have a equally good or better way, do that, I guess. Maybe just do my way though, because it's good. So what I'm showing here is this is nested inside of this. It keeps it very clear, just like our code. Here's what I do not do, and here's what I see people do. Iterate through each element. I'm sorry, not typing bad. That's not right. Then iterate through the subarray. Check a string. I hope you get the point here. Basically, like I'm writing out a bad paragraph, and even if it's right, it's just so much harder to follow. This is easy to follow through a subarray. Okay, here we say check if element is a string. If it's not a string, it cannot possibly be good. I think I might be making an assumption there, but I think that's right. If it happens to be like a Boolean or an object, that's not going to be good. Also, they have not told us that we need to consider arrays nested at a deeper level. So I think we're good here. Check if it's a string. Then we say, if it's a string, we want to normalize the casing. So even then, I don't say like move all to lowercase, although I think that would be fine. Just normalize it. We're going to go all uppercase or all lowercase. Then we say, if normalized string equals good. Then again, I'm indenting again to show I'm inside of my if statement here. Increment count by 1. Oops. And finally, that last step we said, if count is greater than 2, break out of the loop. Okay, we're not quite done yet. We still need to now make our return statement. So we say if count equals 0, return fail. Even that I should have just copied it. If count is less than 3, return. Let me go to my examples here, publish. Otherwise, return I smell a series. Okay, any questions about that? Anybody see any errors in my logic? I make them, we all make them. Let me expand this. So that's my pseudocode. This is basically code down here, almost at least, which whatever, it's fine. They're simple enough statements. And you see how every line of pseudocode is going to perfectly match, at least that's my intention. I think this will work with a line of code. Doesn't have to be written in JavaScript. We could follow these instructions in any language and it would work. If you are not a JavaScript coder, you're coding something else, really shouldn't change for you. Just your syntax will change. Okay. Questions? Anything? I gotta. Can you return I smell a series if the count is less than 2? I don't think I quite understand your question, Miguel. Count is greater than 2. You could, but it's not necessary. So why do it? If it's 0, it's going to return here and nothing else will run. If it's less than 3, it's going to return publish and nothing else will run. Otherwise, we get to this case and we can assume that count is greater than 2 and we can return it there. Chris, you're my biggest fan. I appreciate that. Of course, it's nice to hear good things like that. Okay, cool. Now we move on to the next step, which is write a test. And these steps go together. Write code to make the test pass. And finally, repeat the previous 2 steps until you're done. So we're going to write our first test now. When we write a test, we're going to take directly from examples that we've already created. And we're going to do that until we're done. If we've done our examples well, we should just be able to use examples and hardly anything else. Okay, so now we're going to get into tests. I think even if you've used CodeWars, again, if you're like me in the beginning, you probably are not using tests as much as you should be. So let's get to it. I'm going to delete a bunch of this. I would recommend you follow this process and mostly delete all of the tests that are given and learn to write your own tests well. So describe, okay, we're not going to talk that much about this. This is a testing framework. This is pretty much included in every CodeWars problem. Here we have a describe block and it tells us, what do you want to test here? We want to test well of ideas parter version. Fair enough. A lot of times this is just like some dummy text, but this one's actually pretty good. I'm just going to leave it the way it is. Here though, we're going to delete this and we're going to say, what does it do in this particular case? In order to decide, we need to look at our first example. So we go to our first example and we say, what is this doing? It is handling an empty array. So I go over here and I say it handles an empty array. And I've already changed this so that it's just an empty array. And again, I want you to see the direct correlation. Empty array is the input, fail is the output. Empty array is the input, fail is the output. This matches 1 for 1 with our first test here. And then we're ready to run our tests. So we go down here, click on test, and that fails. This is where we get to test-driven development. We write a test, we make the test fail. Now we're going to go to our code and we're going to say, what of this pseudocode do I need to implement in order to get this test to pass? So the first thing I need to do is a count. So we'll say let count of good equals 0. Okay. And then down here, I just need to return fail. So I say if count equals 0, and I'm just going to copy from right here, return fail. That is all I think I need, right? If I'm wrong, my test will tell me that I'm wrong, but I think that is going to be just fine for this test. So I go back and test again, and count is not defined. Sure it is not. I named it count of good. Okay, now we've passed that test. We're ready to move on to our next one. So I go to my next example. My next example is, I'll just copy the whole thing, is an array with good and publish. So I will open my tests again. Here we'll say it handles one subarray with good. Now we need to set up a callback. And let me just paste that so I don't lose it. I copy from this test here. I bring it down. I say, okay, my input is right here. That goes like that. And my output is right here. That goes here. And we'll go ahead and delete that. And then I'll run that again. And now we see our first test is passing and our second test is failing. That's okay. That just means we need to implement a little more of our code. So I always try and do the minimum here, but we might have to do most of this. Iterate through array of ideas, iterate through each subarray, check if element is a string, normalize the casing. So we don't have to do this. We don't have to do this. We can just do this. So, okay, I'll start up here. So I will do for const subarray of, it's not capitalized, of array of ideas. So that's going to get us through each subarray. Now remember, all of this is indented inside this for loop. So there's, of course, different ways to do that on strictly on the keyboard, but I usually just delete that closing bracket and move it down here immediately so that I don't lose my way in here. Okay, now I'm here for let element, I guess we don't know what it's going to be, of subarray. Made a mistake here. Subarray, yep. Okay, good. Same thing. This goes down here. Let me expand that a bit. Okay, here we are. Okay, check if the element is string. I know it's a string because, and in fact, I see here, I don't have any tests that are testing this. So we won't implement this until we create some tests that do it. Normalize the casing. It already is lowercase. I don't need to worry about this right now. If normalized equals good. Okay, so here I say if element equals good, increment count by 1. Okay, so that is count of good plus plus. And I don't need to worry about this either because we're only, again, I'm like a horse with blinders on, right? I'm just looking at the test I have in front of me. So we don't need to even worry about this here. We can just do count of good. And let's, oh, lastly, we need this here, right? If count of good is less than 3, return publish. Cool. Sometimes when a line is like so matching my code, I just turn it into code. You know, again, if the interviewer's like, no, leave your pseudocode intact. Okay, I will. It's pretty simple there. Great, we passed. Any questions until there? Okay, I see students all the time have a lot of trouble with the blinders method. Like, wait, but I gotta do this. Wait, we gotta do this. No, you don't. because right now we're just in a world where we're just trying to solve these two cases here. We're not trying to do everything all at once. So we're just like baby steps. If we take enough baby steps, we'll get there. Okay. Let's go to the next test. So again, I go right back to my examples. Take from here. Now we might ask ourselves, handles one subarray with good. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to have all my test cases with one subarray be inside of here. So here is another one. And this isn't, you know, I don't know. It's not science. It's like you do more testing, you'll get a feel for what feels right. These things go to me grouped together enough. So here's good and a bad, and still we want publish. So again, I'm taking directly from my example, building out another test case here. And I don't think, in this case, I don't think we even need to do anything else, right? Looks good. Looks good, works good. On to our next example. Okay, let me copy this one. And again, I don't know, I emphasize this too much. I'm sure you're like, why do you keep saying this? That's just because I see people struggle with this over and over. The work is done when we build our examples. That's a lot of the hard work right there. And the pseudocode, those are definitely the hardest steps. When we're writing our tests, it shouldn't be hard because we're literally just taking from examples that we've already written. I don't want to see anybody making up examples as you go to write your test down here. Unless you decide later, and I see a case where we indeed will have to do this. We didn't do any non-strings, I think, so we'll have to write an example for that, but we'll add it to our examples. All right, so here we paste in this, and now again we paste in the expected result, which is I smell a series, and get rid of that. Okay, now I don't see how this could possibly pass. I expect it to fail again. Perfect. So why does it fail? Because it has 3 goods. And what do we need to do? We need to go to our code. At the minimum, I need to bring this line in, right? Because that will return I smell a series. It was before returning undefined, which I think that's all we need to change then. So I'm just going to test it again, and boom, it works. Great. Okay, go back to our examples. Now we're moving into this example here, which has more than one subarray. So I'm going to write a new it block. I'm going to say it handles more than one subarray. And same thing, we need a callback here. Not going to get too much into that, but we can just, the templating for how to write tests is pretty much in every CodeWars problem. You can just copy it until you get used to it, or until you learn it better. And again, I'm just going to copy from an existing test, paste it in here, copy the input here, and paste it in here, and copy the desired output, paste it in here. Make sure I clean that up. Okay, I'm missing one closing parenthesis there. My bad. All right, so let's run it. Again, we might have everything passing. Yep, it works fine. We handling one subarray is just as good as handling 2 in this case. So we go to our next example. And we do it again. Here's this. Put this in here. Put this in here. A lot of programming is a lot of copy and pasting, but that's so much better than if we get typos or make small mistakes that are going to cost us. Go again. Okay. Expected publish to equal I smell a series. Okay, first thing I want to do is I want to check my test to make sure I did it right. So starting at my example here, I've got good, 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 3 goods. And then I smell a series. Okay, check my test. Good, good, good. Oh, I see a problem, right? Here I see I did not normalize the casing. So let me work on that and see if that works. So that's already in our pseudocode, right? Normalize the casing. So here we just say element equals element dot to lowercase. Now we could normalize to uppercase or lowercase. I'm just going to normalize to lowercase here. I think that works fine. Okay, let's see if that does the trick. Boom, it does. We've turned one more line of pseudocode into actual code. Good for us. And we're on to our, maybe our final example. Looks like this one. Did I skip one? Nope. I did not. I think that one goes in here as well. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, looks good. Okay, so again, I'm just going to copy from here, paste here, copy from here, paste here, and bring in fail instead of I smell series. Delete this. Good, good, good. And how would it go? We go fine. Okay, now at this point, if I'm interviewing, I say, oh, you know what? I see in my examples, I did not include any case like this. If I have an array and it has a subarray, and let's say it starts with a good, but then it has true. That is a case I have to handle. And in that case, we would expect publish. But I want to look at least a couple more cases like this. So I could have an object, right? It says it might not be a string, so I really don't know what I'm going to get. I could have an array with an array inside of it. I could have an array with a number. You know, I'm sure we could have some other data types. I'm thinking that's comprehensive enough. Do you see any data types that I should definitely check for? Again, I'm checking in with the interviewer. I mean, that should be fine. But the interviewer might say, oh, let's check for a set or something else weird. I'm like, no, I think it's fine. An interviewer probably, yeah, that looks good. Okay, cool. So I'm going to write a test for this. So let me go here and let's write another block. And let's say it handles subarrays with non-string elements. Cool. And then we'll go ahead and delete most of those. And back to my example here. Here it is. I'm just going to copy both of these at once. They're going to go close to each other. All right, so here's my input. Good and true, and publish is correct here. So let's go ahead and run that. Let me clean up a bit. Okay. We'll go ahead and run that. Element to lowercase is not a function. Yeah, that's because it's a Boolean, not a string anymore. So that brings us, I think, to our last line of pseudocode that we need to handle. We say if type of element equals string, then we want to do the rest of these things. I got to be a little careful here to see where this should close out. I believe it closes right there. And let's see if that worked. Run it again. Looks good. Okay, we want one more test here. And that's going to be this one. And that's also publish. I'm going to delete those. Clean that up. And run that test. All right, we're looking good. Now, this is where the interview would end, right? We followed all our steps. We wrote out our code to make the test pass. We repeated the previous steps until we're done. Hopefully the interviewer is thoroughly impressed. I will make a big fat caveat to say, writing tests like this is pretty time consuming. I have sort of a shorthand way I do this in Replit or CoderPad, which is basically just console log and assert that it's equal to something. Yes, I can send a link to this solution. I got to figure out where I can put it, but yeah, sure. I'll send it to you guys. So it may not be feasible to write out tests like this, but even if you just get started like this and the interviewer says, oh, you know what? I see what you're doing. We don't really have time to write out all the tests. Let's move a little bit faster. Like, you're only going to score points with your interviewer. Most candidates will never know how to write tests, and that the way we built up a strong test, I can't think of the word, basically a strong test file here is, you know, it's more of an intermediate skill. It's definitely an advanced beginner skill, and it will put you way ahead of the competition almost all of the time. Okay, cool. Now, the last thing is to review. We want to, if we're not with an interviewer, right, we're like on a take-home assessment or something, we just want to review. So we've got a two-dimensional array. Yeah, we handled that. For good ideas, which is a string of good, yep, bad ideas are bad. If there are one or two good ideas, return publish. Good. Excuse me, if there are more than two, I smell a series. Let me just check our strings here. I smell a series, exclamation mark. Yeah, looks good. Fail, exclamation mark, publish. Yep, okay, looks good. The subarrays may not be the same length. Okay, we looked at that. The solution should be case insensitive. Good, good, and good all count as a good idea. All inputs may not be strings. Okay, I don't see anything that we haven't handled. So I think we're fine here. Now, I challenge all of you that you should never click on attempt unless you believe with all of your heart that it's going to be green the first time. If it's not, it means we didn't do very good writing our tests. We didn't test all of the cases. We should always have the hope and expectation that when we click attempt, we get perfect green. That means our code thoroughly solved the problem that we were presented, and we followed our steps and we did everything. I think we're good here. I hope we're good here. I believe we're good here. So I'm going to click on attempt and we see, yep, we are all green. We passed everything. That's great. We passed all the random tests here, and means that our code handled the problem perfectly well. Let's pause for questions.